Welcome to the Language in Motion podcast, where we share inspiration, tips, and tricks from stories of success and failure on the language learning journey.
Our next guest is Nate. Nate is fluent in Portuguese and French and also speaks Spanish and Swahili. Nate, you have also taught languages in addition to learning them. Can you tell me a bit about your experience as a language teacher?
Well, so I actually started teaching the first time as a French TA or a teacher's assistant when I was in college. Our goal was just to get the students talking in French and to practice conversation and kind of by whatever means necessary. So that I think was a really good base for me to do what I've done ever since, which is base my teaching around conversation. And it gets back to that idea of immersion learning that I think is really important. Even if it's only for an hour, you should spend that hour that you're learning and that you're teaching in that language. It makes all the difference in what I've seen.
And so would you say that has been the most important factor for the success of your students?
I would, yeah. In part, I think because it's like I said before in the other segment, no matter what language you're speaking, the most important skill is learning to express yourself and learning to problem solve how you are understood. And often that comes in those moments of immersion when communication isn't working that well or there's kind of a breakdown. Those are often the best moments for the student to learn not just maybe some new vocab or pronunciation, but also how do you handle that in the real world? Because there are going to be times when you go to order a drink and the guy is gonna laugh at you, which can be tough to handle at first. So It's good to be prepared.
And what aspects of teaching English have been particularly challenging for you, and how have you overcome these challenges?
So I think being an native English speaker, on some level, a big challenge for me was kind of accepting that I, believe it or not, don't have the answer for everything, particularly when it comes to grammar. It's certainly, for someone who's not trained in English language teaching, which I wasn't when I started, there are a lot of grammatical phenomena that I don't ever think about. I just use them. And what may not be challenging is saying what to do. What can be challenging is ever trying to explain the logic behind it. And in English in particular, I think that's a challenge in and of itself. But because it's something natural, it's something that I've not had to think about. It can be having someone ask me, well, why do I say this instead of that in this context? Me being able to admit, you know what, I need to think about that, or let's Google it. Let's see what the rule is. One thing actually that my experience with teaching financial education and adult education has taught me that I've been able to apply to language learning is this idea that we need to stop thinking of the teacher as this gatekeeper of knowledge, that the teacher is the one giving the student the knowledge and the student is the one who needs to receive it. What I have found is important is, one, to recognize that the student is already bringing knowledge and experience to their lesson, but also that the teacher is not that gatekeeper. The teacher should be a guide that helps the student learn how to learn. answer those questions, because I won't always be there to tell you, oh no, use the word that in this context. Use the word this when you're talking about an object that's right next to you. The ability to deal with those doubts and to learn on one's own, I think, is really where a teacher can add the most value. And being able to accept that you're not going to know everything will kind of counterintuitively give you a lot of confidence when you're in those moments of not knowing something, because you can say, well, let's go find out.
Mm-hmm. And what aspects of teaching have been most rewarding for you, and why?
So it sounds kind of corny, but laughter of all things. That language learning should be fun. It should be lighthearted, right? And I think it's very easy to take ourselves too seriously, especially when it comes to language learning, because it's a very uncomfortable position to be an adult with the self-expression ability of a 2-year-old. It's a vulnerable position, and it's not, at least not for everyone, a position or a vulnerability that is comfortable. And so when I hear a student laugh, or God forbid, I'm actually able to make a joke that makes them laugh, that's a sign to me that there's learning taking place, because it's hard to learn when you're closed off and when you're feeling exposed, as if that's a bad thing, right? We're going to be exposed, but being able to be okay with that and look at yourself as a 25-year-old toddler and laugh, that's a much easier way to go through this all.
And how would you distinguish your successful students from your less successful students? What characteristics do you think differentiate them?
I think the biggest challenge is when it comes to expectations. That, well, for one thing, I think motivation is one thing that makes a student successful. But at least with the students that I've had, anyone who's paying for a class is at least sufficiently motivated to do that. But having the proper expectations as to where you are in your language development, and where we can get and when, will help you avoid those moments of frustration that can sometimes, when we let them, be kind of insurmountable. The more realistic expectations we can have, I think the better the easier it is to gauge our progress, to gauge how things are going, and a great way, to handle that challenge of expectations is to do a very honest assessment of their level, right? It can feel uncomfortable for us to tell someone that they may not have a very high level of English, and it may be uncomfortable for them to hear, but as far as pedagogically speaking, as far as their learning, it's really critical for them to get started on the right foot.
And how have you overcome difficulties while helping less successful students?
Yeah, well, partly, I guess, is making sure they can understand where they are and the sort of expectations they have. Another kind of technique, I guess, I use, particularly with this idea of immersion, is